All right. Now, it's just been past the 10th anniversary of the Disclosure Project Media Conference at the Washington Press Club. So let me look back. 10 years ago, the Disclosure Project staged the event in Washington, detailing several of the hundreds of personal accounts of alleged UFO activity. Were you hoping then that this so-called disclosure moment would have happened before now?
Well, actually, what we've said, and this is what a lot of people don't understand, and it's a little bit shocking when they hear it, is that event and all the follow-on events that have been happening, those are the disclosure moment. In other words, I was never really expecting the President of the United States to disclose things that he, in fact, had no access to. One of the things that was one of the real sort of existential crises of my life, actually, was when the CIA Director Woolsey told me and my wife, when we were meeting with him, that, when I asked him, will you work to help get this information disclosed? And he looked at me shaken, actually. And this guy is not that good of an actor. He was not deceiving in any way. He says, how do we disclose that which we don't have access to? So really what the Disclosure Project was about was a call for this information to come out and to ask for congressional interest, which there is a great deal of. But we also realized that by then, in the late 1990s and early 2000 period, I had already briefed the head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff and also a General Patrick Hughes, who was the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, both of whom, being extremely senior Pentagon officials, told me that they suspected there was activity going on. They had seen evidence of it, but that they had no direct access to those compartmented operations. So I think that, your sort of high school civics lessons of how government works, I think that is true if you're dealing with tax policy or social policy. When you're dealing with these so-called black projects, that is not true. It's another alternative universe. And so we really, did not think that there would be sort of some seminal moment when just the U.S. president could unveil something. What we were calling for was serious inquiries into the issue, and also for other governments to begin to act responsibly, which in fact they have done. Because if you look in the last 10 years, and particularly in the last 3 or 4, there have been massive releases of information from the French Space Agency, the United Kingdom, the Ministry of Defense, the former head of which Lord Hill Norton, I spent a great deal of time with briefing on this matter, Denmark, Chile. I mean, there's a whole list of countries all around the world, which at disclosureproject.org, you can see that list as things have come out. So what we're seeing is that this is sort of a process. Now, whether or not the President of the United States actually takes some specific open stand on this is to be determined. Okay. What I say to people, we can, be hopeful, but I think it's more important for people to be able to study the evidence that's been put together. For example, it's tantamount to disclosure when, even though we're a nonprofit, non-governmental organization, when we have over 110 top-secret military intelligence and corporate witnesses to these sort of projects, and that information is now on DVDs and videotape and in books and transcripts and government documents and on and on. So in terms of establishing the facts of the case and the information that is out there, what I think also has to be done is that the public needs to understand that until such time as the governments of the world say, hey, we're not alone in the universe, perhaps we should have some kind of diplomatic outreach to these civilizations from other star systems that are here. What we have done at the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence, CSETI.org, is to put together sort of citizen diplomacy teams to study that issue. And I think this is very similar to what some of my colleagues in a group called Physicians for Social Responsibility did during the darkest days of the Cold War, who went over to the Soviet Union as civilians and as medical doctors to sort of break the ice and to begin to have a conversation with the Soviet Union that eventually did lead to some détente and then perestroika.
But where do we go? If we're looking for an unidentified flying object, in other words, who do you talk to? That's the issue, isn't it? That it's like the search for God, and until God physically shows up,
well,
who do you
see,
talk
I
to?
think I have to say, with all due respect, that's a term I try to avoid. I think that unidentified flying objects really do not exist. I think that there are two categories of objects once you eliminate, meteorites and other things. One of them are extraterrestrial vehicles, which is a rarer thing for people to see. The more dominant thing that are seen are classified Air Force and CIA aircraft that use this sort of so-called anti-gravity propulsion system, which we know from having met with people like Ben Rich, who was the head of the Lockheed Skunk Works, and other people in the aerospace industry. I mean, as you know, my uncle, my mother's oldest brother, was the senior project engineer at Grumman, that became Northrop Grumman, that designed the lunar module, which was the funny-looking thing that put Neil Armstrong on the moon.
Yes.
So I had quite a few connections in the aerospace industry, and what we found was that there are extraordinary technologies which are man-made origin, which get misidentified as or called UFOs.
All right, now I'm just mindful of the time for both of us. So, 10 years ago, in that Washington press conference, that media event at the Washington Press Club, do you think you gave media organisations enough evidence to follow up specific visitations, I guess is your word, at the time?
Oh, yes, I do. In fact, one of the senior executive producer for ABC News, which is American, the ABC News in New York, actually met with us, and we gave him 35 digital hours of top-secret testimony and many, many hundreds of documents, classified documents. He wanted to do a big expose at ABC News. He was shot down by corporate ABC and was told they would not allow him to do the story. So, unfortunately, a lot of times, and there's a wonderful book called Into the Buzzsaw that Gore Vidal wrote the foreword for, about how many journalists who tried to push the envelope on certain stories get shut down or run into this buzzsaw. And so here was a guy who, he's now at 60 Minutes, which is a CBS program in America. And, he and I talk periodically, and he said basically some of these stories the big corporate media in America will not cover.
All right.
And so that's just a fact. I mean, this is not a theory. It's an absolute provable fact.
Yep. Now, in your books, you've suggested the occurrence of September 11, 2001, the bringing down of the World Trade Center, got in the way of media intentions to investigate extraterrestrial phenomena. Does the death of bin Laden change anything as far as you're concerned?
Well, that one might hope. I mean, of course, now we're trapped in this ridiculous war in Afghanistan, and whether or not this does change that is I think, perhaps. What I've said, and what I meant by those comments was that there was an enormous number of members of the Senate and Congress in the United States who were inquiring on this subject in the aftermath of the Disclosure Project event. And when 9/11 happened, obviously everyone's attention got put strictly on that event. And so it became, of course, something that was all-consuming. And obviously both for media and for public officials in America and throughout the world. So when I think, of course, the focus can come back to this issue, which is, I think, happening, and it's certainly happening more in other countries, I have to admit, than in the United States, what you're going to see is a number of additional people coming forward on this. And in fact, if you look at this, Governor Simonton Fife of Arizona has come out and said that he actually did see the so-called Phoenix lights and that they were extraordinary and they were not some sort of a flare from an airplane. There are many people who, as we have broken ice with the Disclosure Project, are continuing to come out. So This is a big educational project. It's an enormously controversial subject. It's ridiculed a great deal and marginalized, and we understand that. So, of course, just happening 4 months after the National Press Club event, 9/11 certainly sort of distracted people from the growing focus on this, but I think that's in fact coming back.
Okay, now you've mentioned to me a couple of times, you briefed the CIA Director James Woolsey on the project, and a one-time head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Have any high-profile people like the level of James Woolsey come back to see you since that time, sought you out?
Oh, yes. I mean, these are ongoing sorts of meetings that have happened. Well, of course, some of them I don't want to mention if they're currently in office. But I'll give you an example. A man who in Canada who had been the Minister of Defense there, Paul Hellyer, and I had a joint press conference in Toronto a couple of years ago, and he has actively gotten involved in this issue, and in fact has just published a book talking about disclosure and these issues. So this does continue to happen around the world, and that's what I find really rather encouraging.
All right. Now, one question remains on this subject in my mind, given that this is
only one.
well, I guess one immediate one. Given that this is part 2 of an interview process. But if the Earth is being visited by life groups from other planets, how is it that just a small group of people in the so-called military-industrial complex can keep this secret? Why aren't extraterrestrial life forms just turning up for the whole world to see?
I think, in fact, if you look at the Harris polls and the other polls that have been done very recently, a majority of people in America and in other countries as well believe that there's intelligent life out there and that we have been visited, and some aspect of the government is keeping it secret. Not a small minority, but a majority. In fact, more people accept this than believe Social Security in the United States will be around in 10 or 20 years. So, in fact, it is hidden in plain sight, and this is the irony of the subject. It's sort of like the crazy, Meshuggah, the ant in the attic that no one wants to talk about. But in reality, people do know this. And so when I first got involved with this some 20 years ago, maybe there was 20-30% of people who thought this would be possible. Now it's up in the 60% range. So in fact, that's what I'm talking about. This is actually already happening. And, there are all kinds of people from all walks of life, whether it's the former Minister of Defense of Canada, the Honorable Paul Hellyer, or the lead singer for the Foo Fighters, a famous rock band who has come out very publicly recently saying he absolutely believes this is true. And in fact, Foo Fighters were these UFO-type objects seen during World War II that we investigated. That's how the rock group got its name, for people who don't know that.
Well, I never knew that. That's interesting to me. So three quick,
very interesting, I think. 3
quick final questions, just brief answers. Who has the best data in the world on UFOs?
I think the Disclosure Project and disclosureproject.org really does in terms of documents and top-secret cases and authentic materials.
All right. What geographic location in the world is most likely to contain residue evidence of being visited by life forms from other galaxies?
Well, I think it's actually spread throughout the world. Just recently in India, there was a cave that was discovered and proven to have artifact drawings of people some 5,000 years ago who drew pictures of things that look exactly like modern UFOs and ETs. A similar cave exists in France with drawings that have been carbon dated to 5,000 years ago. Everyone's aware of the mysterious Nazca lines in Peru, which are still visible from space and from the air. And there are many things like this, but in terms of ongoing events, the data is huge. There's some 500,000 confirmed cases in the database. We have now around 4,000 cases where these objects have landed and left physical trace evidence. And there are some 3,500 professional and military pilots, along with radar cases that are in the archive. So, and it's really from every country, from Mexico and Chile to New Zealand and Australia to France and England to China. So there's no one place. I think this is, and it is really the weight of the global evidence that once you begin to drill down on this subject, it's really quite overwhelming and dispositive.